Nigeria's headline inflation rate slowed to 18.02% in September 2025, marking a decline from 20.12% recorded in August 2025. Now, the September inflation rate decline came as the biggest fall in the last 6 months, according to the NBS data from April 2025. On a month-on-month basis, the headline inflation rate stood at 0.72%, reflecting a moderation in price increases across key sectors. Joining me now to discuss this further is Opadeji Opakunle, who is head global macro and commodity markets, Kainos Edge Consulting. Good morning to you, Opadeji. Many thanks for joining us on the Global Business Report.
Good morning.
Right. Well, most welcome. Let's begin with a talk of the day economy-wise. Nigeria's headline inflation eased into 18.02% in September 2025 from 20.12% in August. What's driving this decline?
Well, broadly, considering the current phase of the year we're in, this is Q4, one cannot exempt or look away from food inflation. We operate a single rain-fed agriculture season in Nigeria, and harvest starts trickling in by June, July, but a majority of the harvest come in Q4, September, October, November. And so that, to a large extent, if you take aside the numbers and parse it properly, you'd see that the largest impact was with food inflation, which has dropped significantly. And, we're all smiling. Right.
So it's very agriculturally influenced in this case. Well, this report also shows a sharp year-on-year drop. That's from 32.7% in September 2024. Is this reduction due to price stability or base year effects?
To a large extent, I would say it's price stability. That's because the base year effect wouldn't be felt till about December, and we'll be more comfortable to say what direction the base effect would kick in Q1 of 2026, because the current inflation numbers were rebased December of last year. And so everyone has been hoping that we're, the very optimistic side of things, people hope that we get a single digit before December. But at Kainos Edge, we put our projections at best case scenario, 18% for December. Worst case scenario, we had put it about 19%. We had also said that there is a possibility, depending on what the spending is in December for the Dirty December celebrations, because last year you had about $70 million pouring into Lagos State, which is a significant portion of the Nigerian economy. And then also people come home for holidays from domestically within the country. And so then when you compare the year on year, that is a major thing to consider. So the base effect much later. So I would say year on year we are seeing a moderation based on the fact that the basket has changed. Might not be the best scenario to compare this year versus last year, because that is apples and oranges. And so by December we now have a situation where we can compare apples with apples. So the base effect not quite yet, but soon enough.
Right, absolutely. Well, it's also near enough. It's a couple of months from now. You alluded to food inflation earlier, which, very welcoming data there. But let's get a bit more granular about it. This report notes a decrease in price items like maize, gari, and beans. Firstly, how popular is this data when we're looking at the man on the streets? Because you could talk to a vendor who's telling you, what, I don't see a difference. And then, do this reflect seasonal trends or improved supply chains?
It's more of seasonal trends, and I'm happy you mentioned those three commodities, because I started my career as a commodity analyst. When you take rice, when you take beans, for instance, harvest for beans starts in the northern part of Nigeria, and that's where the major production comes from at about July, August. And you saw beans drop from about 3,000 naira, 3,500 naira per kilogram in Lagos to currently about 1,200 naira. And that is because early harvest from Niger Republic has come into Nigeria. Niger Republic in particular produces 70% of their beans for export into the Nigerian market. Nigeria is the largest market for beans, and we consume the largest in West Africa. We're a net importer. And so that moderated prices really. And for maize, last year we had an unprecedented bullish price run for maize. We went as high as 1,100 per kilogram for maize. And then, the government put in policy to allow duty-free imports for this commodity, because maize trickles into almost everything we consume, most especially animal protein. We have large poultry industry in the southwestern part of Nigeria, Ekiti State, Oyo State, and a good portion of the animal feed is from maize. And so the government, through policy, was able to crash maize from about 1,100 naira all-time high per kilogram to as low as 250 naira. That was majorly significant, and so it means that transmission effects to meat, transmission effects to all the cereal you eat, because Tolaram has a large factory producing. For those of us that try to be bougie and say we don't eat Nasco, we don't eat Tropic, you eat Kellogg's, but Tolaram is producing it now locally. And so when you look at the supply chains which are connected domestically, that to a large extent has contributed to this price drop or price stability. And so to a large extent it is cyclical, or rather seasonal, because harvest has come in and these prices have begun to drop. Likelihood of this continuing till January, not so high, because the lowest prices you would always see is in Q4, between September and December. By when farmers go for Christmas break, prices start to rise, because the farmers in Kaduna and Makurdi State, in Benue State, which those two states are the food baskets of Nigeria, they want to buy new motorcycles, they are going to buy clothes for their kids, by January they are going to start paying school fees for their kids going back to school, and so prices start to shoot up again. January, February, there's another peak there. So it might not be consistent till Q1 of next year, but I would say we'll have a lot of respite in Q4.
Well, that's certainly good to know. So are you saying that there is absolutely no reason for, as we speak today, for a maize vendor to, give you an exorbitant price and say, Madam, it's inflation?
Well, depends on where you're buying from.
Okay, there's that factor as well.
You have to look at the market gate prices, look at the farm gate prices, and look at the wholesale prices, which are the intermediary between all of this. So for those of us that live in Lagos, we might not feel that effect as much as maybe someone who lives in Kaduna State, Benue State, and interestingly, Niger State, because a lot of government intervention, a lot of state government focused programs on agriculture are happening there. And, lots of things will make those prices moderate.
Not forgetting transportation and logistics costs as well. So that might be a balancing factor. Let's look at core inflation, excluding farm produce and energy, of course, standing at 19.53%. What does this say about underlying inflationary pressures in non-agricultural sectors?
Well, I would say that when you look at the core inflation, taking out the noise from energy and food, you expect a lot more stability, which you can see with the numbers. But you know that almost everything in that core inflation basket has some correlation with energy prices because of transportation costs, which, we've had problems with the Dangote refinery and Pengasan and the other unions over the past couple weeks. So this transmission, no matter how little, affects it. And so I will say so far that crisis with the refiner and the labor unions, it balances out or is settled. Likelihood of us having moderation with core inflation would continue.
All right, okay. So prospectively, we have
despite,
that on the
despite
of what we have on
the
ground.
9.25 per litre price of petrol that you see now, despite that.
Well, what a time. Well, let's look at urban versus rural inflation now. Now, many people would say this is given. This should be easier to figure out. But what factors continue to widen or narrow the gap between both?
So when you put two of them in two different silos, on the urban side, look at imports. Especially with respect to food. Look at the imports that are coming in. When we have low market stalls, we have the lean season with our agricultural cycle in Nigeria, we rely on imports, and those imports hit the urban areas first. Not only because they can afford it more, but look at the route of these goods coming into Nigeria. Look at the seaports, the major seaports in Lagos. Lagos is a cosmopolitan city, it's the melting pot of Nigeria. A lot of people say there's no rural region in Lagos, but I mean, it's there in Ikorodu, it's there in Ekpe, but majority is in the urban side. And then look at the rural side on the other baskets. If production peaks and harvest starts, food inflation drops in the rural areas. But between these two, it depends on what's time of the year you're in. So it means that the transmission effect now will be from the rural to the urban because food prices have dropped in the rural areas. But you still also have to think about the factor around the bandits, displacement of farmers, if that has caused any significant change in the states, or where a scenario where the state governors have not put in specific programs to those rural areas where the agricultural sector is mainly found, especially on the crop production side, you're likely to have that spike above the urban. But at the moment, you have rural moderating faster than the urban because we're in the harvest season. And on the other side, for the urban areas, there is stability, especially in states where income is high, the household wallet has a lot of space for discretionary spending, and so they can there's wiggle room for them. And so that's the connection.
Right. And it will all really boil down to that wiggle room ultimately, because some people could use that as a determining factor as to where to become their base. Am I spending more there? But like you highlighted, insecurity in other areas. But does this divergence also reflect differences in transportation costs like we highlighted before, food distribution, income levels, and things like that?
Oh, yes, to a large extent. So I was discussing this a couple of weeks ago with a couple of economists, and one of the things that we talked about and is very important to notice, at the end of the day, your expectation for the moderation of food inflation or inflation in the rural areas might not be as fantastic as one would expect for this harvest season because of energy cost. Transportation cost is really high, right? And so this is going to transmit into whatever goods or services are coming out of the rural areas or services that are going through the rural areas, especially now that the government is putting a lot of focus on mechanization. Whatever inflation you have in the urban area is going to flow to the rural area. So far, you're going to move technicians, you're going to move technical know-how, you're going to move those machineries to the rural areas.
Absolutely. The mechanization point, very important as well, because when you look at smallholder farmers and all that, a different conversation for another day. But let's wrap up with broader implications. How do these figures align with the central bank's monetary policy direction, especially after the recent policy adjustments?
So the central bank has gone back to orthodox monetary policy, and Mr. Cardoso made it clear that, they're going to stick to their mandates of controlling inflation, fighting unemployment. But now we're talking about inflation, right? Yeah. On the inflation side, so far, inflation moderates. You can drop interest rates, and it's good for businesses, especially large businesses. Small businesses maybe less than large businesses. And so I think, in my opinion, the central bank is going to be more comfortable to keep dropping rates. However, we must also know that there is some inflationary pressure that comes in December, because first off, a lot of businesses shut down. Everyone is in a relaxed mood, just wants to have fun, especially in Lagos, right? And so we might not have this moderation continue into December. It might continue till November, but December not so likely because there are inflationary pressures that are going to come in December. And so that is one very important factor to consider when you look at it, in the short term till the end of Q4.
Right, so we have to be cautiously optimistic. It sounds like the theme for this week so far, cautious optimism. I want to thank you so much for joining us. If you joined us midway, I've been chatting with Opadeji Opakunle, who is head global macro and commodity markets at Kindness Edge Consulting. We'll see you again very soon. Bye.